I mean, there's stuff that I want to ask and learn about, but it's essentially how we were having our conversation out there.
Yeah, okay.
I think it'll just develop like that, if
As
that's
it is,
okay with you. Because I think what I've learned from your work is that it's not necessarily about talking about what each individual work means.
No, of course not. Yeah.
And so, although I'd like to reference some of the works in the exhibitions, I feel like it's more than that, than just the reading of the work and talking about the fun things that we talk about. So does that sound okay?
Well, that makes sense. I mean, the work is the work.
The work, yeah.
I mean, there's no way that one can interpret. And the reasons that I try to stress that for people, essentially, they always want you to explain things away. And I'm not interested in doing that. I'm not committed to it. If people actually experience the work, they will take away what they need.
And that's what I get the sense for sure.
Sure.
That, One thing I wanted to do, though, is I wanted to gift you something.
Oh, wow.
Because the last time I was here, you gifted me with something.
Well, what do you mean?
Yeah, you gave me a cobalt blue glass bottle.
Yeah, of course.
And it sits on my shelf, and I think about you.
That's great.
So I wanted to bring you a gift.
Thank you. Can I open it now?
Yes, of course, yes.
Whoa. I'm a sucker for goodies. So what do we got here? Oh, wow.
So she has lived with me on one of my sculptures.
Wow.
And I think about you with thinking about just our previous talks.
It's incredible.
And thought that the wrapping as a gesture is something that connects us in a way too.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I will put it in a place where I can enjoy it continually. But you know, I keep things that actually mean something to me, and this is essentially one of those things that will actually allow me to understand and do more. So thank you so much for thinking of me. I do appreciate it so much.
Well, I think, the act of gift giving comes up in your work.
Well, yeah, that's true.
And thinking about the work that you create, the objects as gifts. And I think there are like layers to that, because I feel like with thinking about ancestral knowledge as a gift, then you translating that knowledge as a gift, and then constructing an object and then presenting it as a gift to then be, I guess, experienced and then somehow lived through the people who
it's passing on. I think it also is even more, but this really hits to the core, because it's the thing that connects us in very specific ways. Sometimes things that connect us are not something that you can articulate. You can't talk about it, but the sense of experience and the feeling carries. And I think that's with any true gift. It makes an impression on you, it makes an impact, it changes you. And most often, if it's a genuine gift, it makes you better.
Yeah.
So that for me is very important, because it's actually in the spirit of giving that the work actually comes to fruition. Yeah, for sure.
When I first met you, when I first met your work, or met you through your work, it was through a piece of writing about breathing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that had informed a video work that I had created.
Tell me a bit more about that. When was this?
Oh gosh, this was maybe 2016 or earlier. There was an article in Canadian Art, a small article.
Yeah.
I was doing research on the act of breathing and breathing practices, and I came across an article about you, and you had gone somewhere to study the practice of breathing.
Yeah, that was Japan.
Yeah. And I realized that there was something really, obviously, without breathing, we were not around, we're not existing. But there's something really special about learning that breathing is a practice.
Yeah.
To not take it for granted.
That's true.
And how it also informs how we navigate the world. And, there are moments where we're calm and the breathing is a different pace.
Right.
And you talk about rhythm.
Yeah.
There's when we're anxious, the breathing runs with us. right?
Yeah, well, there's so much that one can deal with in relation to this active breathing, because to do it with understanding changes us. And although we do it because at some point it is part of our nature to breathe, we very seldom have actually been taught how to breathe effectively.
Yeah.
And so what we do is go through our life functioning on kind of like half energy or less, because at some point the capacity that we have is not activated in the way in which it could.
Right.
And so when one starts to learn a process that teaches you an appropriate way of breathing, it changes everything you do. It changes how you think, it changes how you act, and it changes how you remember. And the remembering is important, I think. You know, for receiving this gift today takes me to another level of remembering, because in a sense, the nature of this awareness is rejuvenated. It's reborn again and again and again. What seems to be important for me about breath is that it connects us to the thing that we really are. And what I mean by that is essentially we carry this body and we move through life and whatever, and yet we're never really clear about what and who we are. We're always on the outside of who we are, and unless we make an effort to find a way to break that barrier, we can go through a false set of conditions forever and never connect. And so I take it for real importance that the timing for me to actually go through the process of learning this process of breathing was critical. I mean, I'm not at a point where I think that I do it as effectively as I could, but I think because I think it's a lifelong quest. But I think to begin the process becomes a way in which one acknowledges what you can possibly become.
So I guess a question there, when you said like the breathing connects, like with, immediately I think you're talking about connecting with yourself and your body, but does that mean also connecting to others in some way?
Well, yeah, because connecting to what and who I really am is connecting with others. What I think is important here is that we go through our lives figuring that we're a solitary entity.
Right.
And I am me, and this physical connection is actually specific and whatever, and I see other people, whatever. But that's not what really is. What we're dealing with is essentially a fragmentation of what we think can be. And we don't face the reality of the fact that we're connected to everything. Interestingly, we live in a set of circumstances that we take for granted. For example, we walk through this building or whatever, and we take for granted the nature of breathing because the air that's available allows us to take things in, and we use it. So what happens is essentially we become comfortable with that. In fact, we assume that it's always there. We assume that it does basic things and we don't have to worry about it. Well, I think for me, that's not the case. We have this incredible capacity to take for granted most of the things which literally allow us to be more than what we seem to be. The qualities of the experience of breathing have a lot to do with the nature of our presence, that is, the presence that we are capable of. The analogy is essentially a fish lives in water. They're surrounded by water all the time, but in fact, they take it for granted simply because to use the water, they swim. Well, we take the air for granted too, because we move through it. It's comfortable because at some point it's always available. And yet we don't take great pains to be able to deal with it effectively in the manner that it would be of most benefit to us. everything that is qualitative for us as living beings is always around us. We're swimming in it all the time, and yet we take it for granted. The more we take it for granted, the less we actually understand the capacity that it has to keep us in a state in which we can become more than what we seem to be.
And that's what like I really want to think about more is the becoming more.
Yeah.
That kind of idea of a transformation or growth. And that makes me think about hearing you talk about the story about your dad saying that there's 360 degrees.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
But we see and experience 180 degrees. And so how do we, or I guess I'm curious and nosy about if you transcend those boundaries, if you've ever felt that you have.
Well, I don't know. That's it's a pretty difficult question to respond to. I think we all have the capacity to what we call break those boundaries. And the more that we become self-aware, the more we start to recognize that we're more than just the physical stuff that's moving around in this world. The more we take for granted the nature of our awareness, the less we can appreciate what our real capacity may be. And again, a fish swims through the water all the time. They take for granted that they're swimming. Without the water, the fish wouldn't be able to live. And then for us, it's the same thing. Without the air around us, we wouldn't be able to live. But one of the interesting things that really becomes important in terms of learning the craft of breathing is the recognition of who and what we really are. Because until we start to actually utilize that capacity to breathe, we're only a fragment of what we can possibly be.
And do you feel that you have experienced that in your work or in the creation or the process of the work or in your learning as you navigate the world?
Well, okay, let's look at the question of the work, what the work is.
Right.
I can respond to the question that it relates to the things that I do, but that's not the work.
The work is the
The
process.
work is what is happening every day of my life.
Yes.
The reflection upon the work is essentially manifested in the things that I make. And so unless the one thing is occurring, the second thing doesn't ever happen. The more I can be attentive to the nature of my everyday experience, the more I can actually respond to the necessities of life, and that extends beyond me physically. It extends to everything that I connect with, because ultimately I am a part of everything that's around. Unless I become aware of that in a greater fashion, I'm limiting my capacity. I'm only working if at some point as a car would be on 2 cylinders when in fact the car has 8 cylinders. And that's not good enough.
Right.
I don't think, for me it's not good enough. And I think for the people that I care about, I don't accept that as good enough either. And that's not just the people that I care about. And I think I'd like to extend it to everybody that I come in contact with. Because ultimately we are essentially one. Everything and every person, every condition that is on this planet is a part of a unity, which is one. When we acknowledge that, and part of the acknowledgement of that is essentially being careful about the nature of how we function in our life, which is about breathing, then we see and recognize our oneness.
Right. Until
we do that, we're fragmented, and at some point we're actually working against ourselves. And I think that when you walk out the door and see somebody in the morning and you walk past them and you say good morning, it's the same as being able to say, I'm a part of you, I recognize you.
I see you.
I see you, yeah, I see you. But not only that, I see, I am you. I am you in a way in which we connect on the level that is most important. So then even every day, as I go about my everyday, that's my work. The benefits of that work I try and use in other ways to be able to express it so that other people can experience it in a way in which they can use it as well.
Right.
But breath is critical. Try and hold your breath for a period of time and see what happens. You know, eventually you actually gasp because you need that.
Yeah.
And even in cases where we're walking around in the world, I started to recognize that we're working on a small amount of what we could possibly have unless we actually have effective breathing. And it sounds crazy for somebody to teach you how to breathe, but we assume that we know how to breathe. We don't know how to breathe.
I think it sounds crazy if you've taken it for granted and you've never realized how often you might be holding your breath.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Or in fact, the fact that you are walking around in a space in which all of the elements that you use as nutrients to keep you alive is everywhere around you. Yeah. And if you're not using it effectively, you're working on a partial state of what you can possibly become.
Yeah.
So my work is essentially what I do every day. My work is really the act of breathing. Mm-hmm. But that is essentially the act of a human in a way in which it is part of our capacity to recognize what we are, who we are, and that we are a part of everything else. Mm-hmm. It's critical, and we don't get taught that. Most often we don't get taught that. Mm-hmm. No. So it was an interesting thing for me to begin that. I've not been the most effective at it, but I'm learning, I'm growing.
Well, I mean, if we think a little bit outside of the box, it's almost like each object you create, each image you make is a product of breathing.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, and allowing, for me, if I speak personally, for me, when I am encountering your work, or really when I'm encountering you, yeah. I'm so hyper aware of my space. I'm hyper aware of my position in respect to you, in respect to your work, because there is this ultimate closeness mm-hmm. that I can't explain. Yeah. I tried explaining it to a friend the other day, and I broke down in tears explaining that sure. Sitting and talking with you often makes me very emotional, because I do feel mm-hmm. like you are someone who sees me. That's a scary thing.
Well, it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be. And with you, it's not. Yeah. It's a very vulnerable thing.
Well, sure.
But you give that's, I think, another gift that you provide in the work you create, is the ability for people to have a contemplative place and space to be seen.
Well, yeah, but you know, it's interesting. You use the word vulnerability. I think it's an appropriate word, because what happens to us and for us as human beings when we feel that others see us in a way which we don't think that we want them to see? What is it that we have to hide? What is it we have to hide from? Or whom is it that we have to hide from? I don't think that that's an appropriate way to be able to look at things, and yet the pattern of our life essentially has been taught to us that we have to be closed. We have to protect ourselves. We have to be careful.
Yes.
And all of those conditions that are put forward for us as we grow become prisons. Mm-hmm. They become prisons simply because they don't afford us the opportunity to be free, to just be what we are and to be seen for what we are. There's an interesting thing about this phrase that you used earlier, I see you. It was actually used in a film a number of years ago, but the notion of that word or those words, when they really are felt truly, I see you means I connect with you, mm-hmm. I am a part of you. Mm-hmm. And when they're said effectively, there's a recognition of our oneness. Mm-hmm. I think that that's an interesting thing, but we very seldom can drop that facade and acknowledge the fact that we are a part of someone else. Even if we don't know them, we're still a part of them. But that also teaches us how to treat people.
Yeah.
Because at some point, if you feel at some point that you can be undone because of someone seeing you in a certain way, it requires that you try and protect yourself. And so you defend yourself. What reason do you have to defend yourself from someone? Because they might hurt you, because they may do something that's unacceptable. If we get to the point where we are willing to allow ourselves to be open to other people, all the animosities, all the negativity fades. And we start to see ourselves in a different way. When we connect with other people and we see ourselves in them, we will treat them properly. But those things are difficult for us because we're always a singular entity. We have to protect ourselves. I have to make sure that she doesn't know this, or he can't do this to me. You know, those are all of the things which hold us back as human beings. I don't think, and I've said this before in cases, I think we have the capacity to become human beings. We're not yet human beings. That is something that we have to strive for. And a lot of that striving has to do with the recognition that we are a part of other people.
What would make us human beings? That recognition?
The acknowledgement that we are one, and that we don't have to protect ourselves from other people. We don't have to defend ourselves. We can just be. And that's hard. I think at some point, the difficulty that we face are essentially, we are taught at some point that we need to actually be in isolated condition.
Right.
And that we have to have this thing we call ourself. And then that becomes ego. It becomes a trap which prevents us from being able to open out to the world and be a part of what we really are. We don't really know what we are. I don't believe that we have the knowledge in an active way to be what we are. I think we have that possibility, but it's up to us to activate that possibility. And therein lies the notion of gifts. When you say something to someone in a loving way, it's a gift. When you make a gesture to someone, which is an open gesture to receive them in a way in which you accept who they are, it's a gift. This is a gift. It's a language of gift giving, but at the same time, it's a gift. When we do that, I think at some point, we open the door to a lot more of what we are as human beings, or at least potential human beings.
Do you think that, because we've talked a lot about like ancestral knowledge and learning, you know, I love hearing stories about your mom and dad.
Yeah.
And what are their names?
Mom was Mary.
Mary.
Mary, and Tom was my father, Tom,
Yes.
yeah.
And so I wonder, for me, like I think about my ancestors and how they inform my practice. And sometimes I don't notice until way after.
Yeah.
Do you think that the way your ancestors are informing you and your practice are allowing you to learn more about what that being human means?
Yeah, I think yes. I think the answer to the question is yes, but it's interesting that it's not ended.
Yes.
It began in my early years with a certain degree of their teaching or aspirations that they had to be able to allow me as a human being to learn and to grow. And I hope that has stayed with me. I can't say that I've actually mastered that or actually become 100% in relation to it, but I think the teachings that were given to me by my mom and dad have gone a long way to actually make me what I am. But there are still aspirations there which actually are still unfulfilled. I think you referred to a statement that my father made, essentially, that he said, there's 360 degrees to reality, but we see only 180. But we can participate in the 360, because to participate in beyond the 360, beyond the 180, is essentially all of the things that are necessary to be able to get the thing complete.
Okay, so that's what, how do we participate in that? Or how do you participate in that?
I try to participate with the work, and that work is every day. Right. Trying to become a better human being by treating people effectively, by responding to humans in a way in which there is a current that connects us, so that I feel that we treat each other with a degree of respect and responsibility. Whether I know you or not doesn't matter. The fact that you are there and I connect with you matters a lot. And I think those connections mean more to me because those connections were taught to me by my mom and dad and saying, those connections are human connections, they're important. You can't put them on the side and say, I don't want to bother. It's too much difficulty right now to do this. Well, I think at some point we make excuses. My mom used to tell me, there's no excuse for you not being a worthwhile person. You have no reason to not be a good person. If you can give me a good reason why you don't have to be a good person, then I'll acknowledge it. But I don't think that's possible. And I think the teaching that was there for me as growing up was constantly about that. I think there were times in my life as a youth, my father would say to me, don't be negative about the conditions that you're in. The conditions that you're in are necessary for you to survive in an effective way, and you must learn what that is. They may not be what you would prefer, but they are a fact of what is. And so how are you going to deal with that? Because whatever you've been given, whether you like it or not, is a gift. So it has a lot to do with the way that you accept the gift that you're given. What do you do with it? Some people are given grand things and never do anything with it. Some people are given fewer things and they do great things with it. So it's not what you're given, it's what you do with it. And I think at some point we forget that. People are so interested in becoming a singular entity that they want to protect themselves, that they never think that at some point they don't need to protect themselves at all.
And I wonder sometimes, I think about it as, rather than protecting myself, as being more of a acknowledging that I do have a presence, and that kind of confirmation that presence is there. It's almost like seeing a reflection in a mirror or in a pane of glass.
Yeah, I think it's good to have the reflection, but I think at some point, if you focus solely on the reflection, you forget about the nature of that which is being reflected.
Right.
So one of the values of looking into a mirror is to really see yourself.
Yeah.
Unless you do that, the effect of the mirror is lost. So the self, what is the self that you see when you look in a mirror? I saw something that's interesting because as a growing up, my people around me said, well, you look very much like your mom. You look like your mom. I never will actually look like my dad, I don't think. I'm not sure that I'll ever look like my dad. Years and years later, I was looking in the mirror, getting ready to shave. Lo and behold, Tom Whiten was standing in that mirror looking back at me. I looked exactly like him almost.
Yeah.
Those things which we recognize, and that is really the word recognize, is a way of reflecting upon the nature of what we are. And we're a lot of those things that we never thought we were. When we begin to accept the fact that we're a wide range of those things, we begin to see our capacities as a potential human being. And until we do that, we're short-shrifting ourselves. We sit in a narrow space, we fit in that narrow space, and we never expand it to become more of what we can be. And I think that's a detriment to us.
Yeah.
To not necessarily see those things that we grow up with as important in our formative years, those things which teach us more of what we can be. We sometimes hear them, we see them, my mom and dad tell us this, and we forget it.
Yeah.
Until at some point, maybe in our life, there's something that brings it back to us in a way in which we start to acknowledge it and start to begin to live it. And I think that's when we start to live, when we start to accept those conditions which are the potentials of a human being, then we start to do the things that we're intended to be doing on this work. And that's our life, that is the work, and it's the work of every day. It's not what we think we physically do, it's the work which we actually are intent on doing, or we're supposed to be intent on doing, and we forget.
We talk about lenses, mirrors, ways in which we see each other, and you invite us to do that in some of your work, where there are portals for us to look through, or lenses, to be faced with something that people, I guess, really kind of associate with death. But in your work, I see it more as a reflection of life, which is the skull. Can you talk to me a bit about that invitation?
Well, I think it's actually the acknowledgement of our mortality.
Right.
The acknowledgement of our mortality goes back to this thing that my father said to me years ago, that there's 360 degrees, but we only see 180. That doesn't mean that we are not capable of seeing more than 180. I think we have to make an effort to do that. Mm-hmm. The making the effort to see beyond the 180 is a thing that's necessary for us, because once we get a chance to actually open the door to that possibility, we see more than what we thought we were going to see. It may be shocking. It may cause us a bit of concern or make us feel uncomfortable for a period of time. But I think it's that discomfort that we have to get over. The discomfort is most often the thing which holds us back. And that discomfort is created by the sense of our ego saying to us, I'm important. I have to be the focus of attention. I don't want to do anything to help anybody else. It's just me. Well, you know, that's a very narrow viewpoint, and that narrowness itself is a prison. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people choose to stay in that prison simply because they don't know any better. But it may also be that they've not been taught to open up to another world. Their experiences don't afford them the comfortability that would possibly be available if they would let go of this limitation. In that instance, for someone to actually open the door to that may mean that you walk along the street and someone's hello, and you say, well, geez, they said hello, they don't know me, but something is going on here. Well, that's initially, I think, a good reflection to be able to think about the nature of the gesture that is made that acknowledges you.
Yeah.
And so that acknowledgement may not seem to be very much, but it is a gift. Mm-hmm. It's the recognition that you are something that needs to be acknowledged. And I think anybody would love to have that in an honest way.
Yes.
The fact that they've not had it before often limits them in terms of the way that they perceive the world.
Yeah.
And so they approach the world in a sense of anger or hostility because they've not been treated well. And that doesn't mean that they're justified in doing it.
Right.
Because most often the justification is actually felt to be accurate because at some point the fear of being treated badly is always there. When someone is treated well, more often than not, even if it doesn't register for them right away as important, it can later on impact the way that they function in life. And I think at some point it may be necessary for those things to happen. We don't generally live in a world in which these things are taught to us. I think historically those things were more evident in growing up in cultures which actually provided those things.
Right.
Our current culture doesn't provide that necessarily. I think it's unfortunate because we've lost something in the way in which our culture has divested itself from the need to relate to other people in a genuine way. There's fear, I'm sure, at times. There are a lot of reasons why people actually feel that they want to cut themselves off or feel, I want to be separate from all this thing. And yet, when one does that, usually what happens, you cut the lines, you sever the lines of the possibilities that you have as a potential human being. And I keep saying that as human. I don't think that we are human beings. I think we have the capacity to become a human being. Mm-hmm. But all of the things which prevent us are the things which hold us back. That is essentially not being open to other people, feeling that we are more important than other people. Those are limitations that are created by us. They're not built into the system at all. They're the fabric of our consciousness to say, I want to be separate. I want to be this and nothing else will change it. That's a pretty harsh reality. But those harsh realities have to be confronted every day.
Right.
And sometimes we have to break them down. Sometimes in the midst of that harsh reality, it's good to take a really good deep breath and let go of the limitations and all of a sudden go, okay, what have I got to lose?
You've opened yourself up, though, in many ways in your work by becoming a part of the work, like through performance.
Yeah.
Even the chewing gum.
Yeah, right.
You know, you're a part of the work there. So your essence is there, and so you've opened up.
Well, I've tried to, yeah.
Yeah, like you've really opened up, and now you've opened up at the same time in 4 spaces, right?
Well, yeah, right.
So
well,
you're
sure,
existing.
It's interesting, you know. I think about this in a way. People actually refer to the use of the chewing gum in cases, and I say, you know, that's a really interesting human thing. I don't know whether other people have experienced it quite in the same way. Have you ever? Well, there's a thing that I grew up with, in the notion of boy and girl come together, they become boyfriend and girlfriend, and they share spit. The nature of sharing spit is essentially the connection to another human being. Exchanging chewing gum for somebody you love is essentially that. When a mother feeds a child, they feed from their own mouth. So that essentially their DNA and all the stuff that goes into their pre-chewed material goes into that child. The connection is extraordinary. It's not a physical connection. It is an electronic connection between a mother and child that can't be broken. Mm-hmm. And it's done because the exchange of saliva is pertinent to the nature of being a part of someone else. So when you exchange chewing gum as a lover or whatever, you're giving a person a part of you. When you kiss somebody, you're giving someone a part of you. So you're reconnecting to the larger world that you're a part of. It's an interesting way of giving. So when I do a work that actually is using chewing gum, I'm sharing an incredible, vital part of me with those out there. Mm-hmm. If at some point one sees a human skull, the nature of that old notion of reflecting yourself in that which you see is clear. Mm-hmm. It's obvious that we are essentially connected in one way or the other. The ways in which we amplify or understand that amplification is all over the place. Yeah. So all I do is point it out. It's there all the time. We trip over it even. Yeah. We breathe in the stuff that we take for granted, and yet at the same time, we don't do it very well. When we do it well, we become something really different. Mm-hmm. When we share with another person, whether the gift is a gift of this kind or other, we are reconnecting. Mm. And I think that reconnecting is the most important thing that we could ever do. And so if I can help in that way, then I'm prepared to do it.
But you have been,
well,
from my experience. You do it through your art practice. You do it or through your teaching practice. But I have never been a formal student of yours in a classroom. But upon meeting you, and even before meeting you, you were teaching and giving to me. And so I see that I can't be the only one. I know that your essence is everywhere. And what's interesting to me is this idea of ancestry, transformation. Mm-hmm. This, how do I explain it? This ability or this knowledge that you are existing in other spaces, in other times, because of how you exist in your work, in the memories you've left with other people, the gifts you've given to other people. You've talked about time being a construct.
Yeah.
So you're existing in all these different spaces. Is spaces a construct?
Well, sure. That's an interesting question, because we talk about this thing called time.
Yeah.
We talk about this thing called space. For me, it's interesting because there's no distinction between time and space. I mean, the theorists and all the physicists will tell you all this stuff or whatever about the nature of space and time and all this stuff. But all of those things that we hear or examine in relation to are nothing more than constructs. They are a way in which we reflect upon the nature of what is, and we try to articulate it in the best way that we can. And yet, most often those things are not articulable. They are realities that we experience, and we use language to be able to put forward what we think we experience. What we're dealing with continues as a condition of consciousness. Mm-hmm. But that consciousness has always been there. Mm-hmm. It will always be there. And the stages of it can be disseminated in ways in which we can talk about it or use language to describe it or whatever we describe what we think it may be. And yet, in all of our attempts to do that, we still fail. Because language, no matter what, is always a lesser condition that prompts ourselves to be able to trap it in a way in which it can be exchanged. And yet the basic means of exchange is just being.
Yeah. But I think that's what's interesting for me is you just being in multiple spaces and multiple times. You know, like...
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's interesting. All of us are in multiple spaces all the time.
Yeah.
We don't realize it at some point, or we may not realize it necessarily. But I think when we do realize it, we understand something more about our capacity as being a human being. You can walk out that door tomorrow or now, and wherever you go, you're accessible to me. But the knowledge of that accessibility has taken a long time to understand, and if I am effective in relation to my understanding of it, I will never forget it. So the qualities that connect us have nothing to do with space and time at all. There's something else that's going on that allows us to recognize, as to re-know what we are, and that says, I am you and you're me. That was the Beatles, I am you and you're me and we're all together. It sounds simple, but it's a lot more complex than that.
It is. I think what I really love though is, and I'm not sure if it's intentional, but this attempt to visualize that in some way.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, that's called language.
Yeah.
What I remember a number of years ago, someone pointed me to a book that was dealing with the sense of human consciousness. And I started reading this, and I said, this is incredible. There were times that are expressed in that book that we did not have the capacity to articulate what our experiences were. So that we were limited, supposedly, in our capacity to see certain colors. The point is here, it wasn't that we were limited in capacity to see the colors, we were limited in the capacity to use language that would describe what we were experiencing. And that's a difference. We are able to experience a lot of things, but we don't always have the language to describe what we're experiencing. And sometimes the problem that we face is trying to construct a language that will deal with what we know and what we're experiencing. Language is always the hang-up, the problem. If we could get a good, clear notion about how to use language to describe what it is we're experiencing, we will have gone over the top. And yet, I think at some point we'll always have to recognize there's always a limitation to language, because language always comes after the nature of the condition of consciousness. Until we actually can find a way to be able to encapsulate that experience, then we can't translate it, just transport it to somebody else.
That makes me think of magic.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Well, it is magic.
How would you define magic? Because I've talked to you before and we've used the term magic, and I love the word magic because I feel it every day and I see it every day. But how do you define it?
Magic is the condition of consciousness in the way in which it manifests. And when I say that, essentially, it's that degree to which we don't understand the mechanism, and we think that it is fantastic. Well, it is fantastic on one level, but on the other level, it's very basic. When a magician creates a trick or whatever, the mechanism of the trick is important because it has to be somehow invisible. You can't see what's being done. Well, the interesting thing about the nature of the magic that we experience every day is that we don't understand the trick that's behind it. And if we do, at some point, we crack the notion of it. And this is what we're constantly trying to do, to find out how it is that all of this works. Well, don't forget, how it works is essentially coded in language. And so language always has to catch up with the nature of the experience. And interestingly, eventually, if we can ultimately create a language which would be consistent with the nature of what is, then everything comes back together.
And that makes me think about like going right back to the beginning of thinking about not talking about what your work is about.
Exactly.
But about the experience.
About the experience. The experience is more important.
Yeah.
Because language always comes after the experience. If you don't have the experience, then there's no value to language.
Yeah.
But people want to actually language ahead of the experience at times, because most often it allows them to feel comfortable with the experience, whereas it should be the other way around.
Yeah.
If the experience takes place, your comfortability of it will allow you to create a language which will reflect the nature of the experience. And so we have this limitation that we continually put on ourselves. People are lazy. Excuse the expression, you know. People are lazy. Often people want to be given the language to be able to deal with the experience without recognizing the nature of their involvement in the experience. And so what happens is they sell themselves short and saying, I'm not capable of having the experience. I have to have someone direct me towards the experience. No, don't sell yourself short. You have the capacity to do that. Make the effort at some point to do it, and you'll find that you'll be richly rewarded by making the effort. But again, it's also this question of laziness. We often get to a situation where we don't want to do the work. My mom used to tell me at some point, you know, don't be lazy, Tim. To be able to learn and grow, you have to do the work.
Breathing is work, right?
Oh yeah. If you don't do the work, there's no value in the experience at all.
Do you feel like you're held back by anything still?
Yeah, me.
You're still held back.
I'm my own worst enemy.
Many of us
In
are.
a sense that I still haven't opened up to the possibilities that are inherent in my capacity as a person. I'm learning that. And it sounds like it's simple, but the simple task of when you finish your dishes and you got to wash the dishes. Oh, I don't want to bother to do it right now. I mean, come on. I mean, I see it all the time, and I'm faced with it continually, because at some point, well, I live alone, I don't want to have to do this thing. Nobody's going to do it for me. So all of a sudden, if I'm not careful, I got a sink full of dishes that need to be washed. Oh, I got to finally wash the dishes. Well, okay, you know, get up off your butt, Whiten, and wash the dishes. You know, what's holding you back? My unwillingness to confront the situations of my life are what's holding me back. My unwillingness is what's holding me back. If I open up and say, okay, well, do it, just do it. All of a sudden, things change. And it's interesting, when I finally wash the dishes, I go, aha, this is wonderful. Why did it take me that long to get past the resistance to do it?
Have you come up with an answer to that?
I don't have an answer.
I was hoping you did.
Except that I hold myself back because of my unwillingness to experience what's necessary to experience. If I am unwilling to commit to doing it, there's only one person that can hold responsible. That's me.
Yeah.
You know? So am I going to wait for somebody else to do it?
No.
Chances are it ain't going to happen. Nobody's here to do it but me. But anytime that I get an opportunity to defray my responsibilities and I use it, it means I diminish my own capacity. Because I don't live up to what I can be, and yet my potential is there. When we dodge the responsibility, we do nothing but a disservice to ourselves.
What do you think your responsibility is?
To be open to all possibilities at all times. And I know that seems to be an impossibility, and yet that is the task, to be open to all possibilities at all times.
So can you maybe talk to me about the idea of consciousness in relationship to what
that?
you, yeah.
Well, yeah, because we have the capacity, our consciousness is huge in capacity. We have the capacity to understand and be a part of a larger condition. The more we make the effort to do that, the more effectively we become. The less that we do it, the lesser effort to do it, means that our capacity is diminished. It's the sense of atrophy, because at some point it is not used. Those things which are fundamentally important, that are laws that govern everything, govern the human being as well. If you don't use it, you lose it.
It's almost like we're behind the glass again,
Sure.
looking through the mirror,
Looking
through the glass.
exactly, yeah. Right,
And that's
exactly.
the glass that creates that
And
barrier.
the glass
for us.
is preventing us from getting onto the other side. And all we have to do is literally take the boundary down and walk through.
Yeah.
But the difficulty that we experience in doing that is greater than one imagine. Often we have to think about it in terms of the way in which we construct language, because language gives us the permission to do whatever is necessary. We think that it does, but it doesn't at all. In fact, language can be a prison, because it prevents us from being able to use those things that we can't articulate.
Well, that's like the invisible.
Sure, of course.
If we don't have the vocabulary for it, then It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
No, we deny its existence, and as a result, we create a problem for ourselves.
Yeah.
Whenever something is existent and we deny it, we're creating a barrier to our own potential human experience.
Do you tie that to your use of intuition when creating work?
Yeah, well, okay. Intuition. What is intuition? I think intuition is nothing more than a state or condition of consciousness. Things which are not evident and rational are not necessarily not there. They're there. But it's a question of how they're there and how we actually make an effort to use them. If, for example, for a moment, we took for granted the nature of breathing and we stopped making the effort, we would die. But in fact, the condition that as a human being is sit there to prevent us from actually shutting it down. Right. We have physical systems in the body that prevent this. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system functions on that basis. If we actually forgot to do something, we would die. So there's an unconscious process that's going on, divorced from our willingness to be able to make it happen. And you'd have to choose carefully to not use it in order to kill yourself. You can hold your breath for a long time. Eventually, you will make an effort to breathe again, okay?
Yeah.
Because the system requires it. The nature of what you're made of requires that you do this. We can only shut that down to a certain degree. We shut it down to with our own peril, though, because we can diminish the capacity to use it. As we diminish the capacity to use it, it starts to diminish in its capacity to be used. And so we create our own demise.
Thinking about this idea of visibility,
yeah.
And paying attention to things makes me think about light,
yeah.
And the role light plays in your work, especially with the use
light?
of light. Yeah.
L-I-G-H-T?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, even looking at, say, for example, going into the exhibition and looking at the work and how your work, I think of shadow in a way of becoming another realm, another
okay. yeah.
layer to something.
Yeah.
And so if I look at installation shots of your exhibition right now, I see the shadow really
amplified.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Which then to me really accentuates this idea of seeing what we don't, that isn't physically there to be seen.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, we see based upon the process's opposition. So light in itself infers the condition which is its opposite, which is darkness.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that they are one. They're always one. You can't see one without the other being there. And yet, often what happens is that the demonstrative condition of one outweighs the obviousness of the other. Mm-hmm. And so we give attention to the thing which is most obvious rather than that which is least obvious. Same thing that we do in terms of breathing. We become consistently concerned about the nature of the physical movements of our body, but we give less concern for breath, which is essentially the means by which the body is activated. Mm-hmm. We have this continual condition to be able to see the dichotomous conditions and actually amplifying one without the other. And I think that's a problem because there's to most things there is essentially balance. To most things effectively, the balance which is the most efficient allows the most efficient use of whatever is to be taking place. And yet we continually, customarily as human beings try to cheat. We try to cheat.
Ties into the laziness.
We try to get around it. The more we try to get around it, the more we cause ourselves problems. Again, the unwillingness to do the dishes means essentially I got to sit eventually and do the dishes. It created a problem where there was no problem to begin with. But this is again a part of the quote human condition, and we have to overcome it. It is there in a way in which we think about it as a limitation, but literally it is literally a useful tool to identify the nature of what we need to address. Most often we would prefer to put it on the shelf and not bother. The more we put it on the shelf though, the more we create the condition that needs to be overturned.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to kick things under the carpet because we don't want to see it. And again, the greatest condition that causes our failure is ourself.
And I would say that, in not trying to make any puns here, but that you bring that to light in your work.
Well, I have to bring it together in the work because I have to see it in myself.
Yes.
So the work is nothing more than a reflection of my limitations. And I think it's important for me to share those with other people so they can see them too. If they can see them, then the gift that I offer them is essentially, hey, we have to deal with this. We have to deal with this.
But there's so much generosity in what you do and in who you are as a human being.
Well, I'm not sure that it's generosity. It's self-preservation, really.
On the other end, as somebody on the other end, I would say that it's generous.
Well, yeah, but don't forget, the recognition of my self-problem is essentially, if I offer it as a gift to other people.
Right.
If I see it as a condition which limits me, and I offer that to other people, it's saying, hey, maybe you would all want to deal with this as well.
Right.
It may be something that's not just my problem, that we all share this, and maybe together we can overcome it if we help each other. Well, then that means something that seems to be very important.
Well, that becomes the one again.
Well, that's the gift,
Yeah.
don't forget.
Yeah.
If I see it in myself, I can't say that at some point it's solely me. It may be something that we can all benefit from. And if we can benefit from it, why not share it with someone else? In fact, saying good morning is essentially the recognition that we see in ourselves something we see in the other person. I see someone walking along the street and they look pleasant, they look really good. I say, well, you look nice. Mm-hmm. Thank you for being there. Good morning. Mm-hmm. Or I see you, just the fact that you're there means that something is positive in the world. Thank you for being in the world. I see you. Thank you. Good morning. Mm-hmm. I don't think that we live in this world alone. I don't believe that we live in this world alone. The assumption that we make in the world is we go alone, mm-hmm. and we don't have to go alone. Mm-hmm. It's easier when we go together.
Can you explain that a bit more? What do you mean by go together?
What I mean, we go together. If we see the conditions of what we are confronted with in our life, more than likely it is also that other people are experiencing the same thing. Mm-hmm. So if we acknowledge it in ourselves, we can also acknowledge it in other people and say, well, maybe they're actually trying to overcome problems of one kind or another. I can't diminish the concern that they have, my concern for them, because they're seeing and dealing with the problem. Maybe I need to acknowledge the fact that they're working at it still and probably need help. Mm-hmm. Maybe my experience can help them too. Mm-hmm. And in that instance, sharing the load means the load is a lot lighter. Mm-hmm. And in that instance, I see you, mm-hmm. because you are me. I'm you, and we experience the same things. Why run from it? Why not help to be able to overcome them together? Because it's easier when we do it together rather than if one is doing it by himself. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like we can talk for many hours, and deconstruct things in many ways. But what I'd really, really like to express to you is a gratitude for all that you have shared and continue to share.
Well, thank you.
With everyone. And I really do believe that my relationship with you has helped me to become a more informed, conscious human being. And so, as I said earlier, I know I can't be the only one that has experienced this gift from you. Okay. And so I want to thank you for that.
Well, that's
on behalf of all of us.
Yeah, thank you.